Hey folks, I'm Aspen Arrow, and this is Planet Zoo. Today we are back in Aspen Park working on our sandcastle. You can see that I have laid out a new sandcastle using the mud pieces as well as some of the aquatic blocks. So thanks to Sloth for the suggestion to look at the aquatic blocks and stones. I was able to match the color, which you can see here on the screen. And using that color, I felt like we achieved a better look of wet sand, which is what you would build a sandcastle out of. So you can see if you get really close, it's still definitely the mud walls, but from a distance, I think it does look pretty much like sand, or at least as close as we're going to get. I had to abandon the idea of using the sand and the blocks to pull through. It just wasn't working. Did go ahead and put some glass panes in because there's actually a walkthrough area for the exhibit. And then here are those aquatic faux rock blocks that we're going to use. Just go ahead and grab this pattern and then we can duplicate it. Duplicate it again, doing it the right way, using the duplicate and move feature. And we can just pull on over to the other side. And create this look, duplicate it again. And then get rid of the blocks that are too tall for our little stairway up here. And scooch them around. And there we go. That's the start of what our sandcastle will look like today. I think this is a big improvement from where we were, and so I'm really excited to see how this turns out in the end. Kind of debating and going back and forth on how many of these blocks to use, but we can always add and subtract. Did want to take time to show you that I made a little staircase and just using the mud panel piece. Go ahead and pull this out after we duplicate. So you can see, and as you can see, I just stack them up like stairs to create this effect. Nothing too fancy, just panels stacked on each other and moved back and forth. Or really more moved up and down and back to make that staircase. So we're going to go ahead and put in our second staircase. Get it set in here. Try and match it to the other one so that we don't have two different looking staircases. And then just duplicate this bottom piece to expand it over to the top here. And as you can see, we had a bit of a gap and that was a little off center. So just go ahead and grab all that. Don't hit the duplicate button this time. I don't know about you, but I always pick the wrong one. Did try using the highlight, but I just never can get it to highlight only what I want. So back to shift clicking. Hit the right move button this time. And we're just going to give it a little bit of a turn, just a little bit straighter. And try this again with our bottom panel. Just duplicate and pull it out. Go ahead and sink this last one down to match. Sink again. Then I couldn't remember how many stairs I'd put in the other one, so I decided to double check. and that we could go ahead and have one more step down and look about right. So we'll just grab this middle row after grabbing the wrong one and sink that down just a touch. And voila, our second set of stairs. Which you can see goes up into that middle piece. There's no pathing under any of this, so it really is just to look visually correct. The guests are not going to be able to get in. We're going to use this 1 meter wall piece from the mud, again, just matched with the color, and we're going to put our edging here, give more of a castle vibe. I debated, as you can see, dropping this down far enough to try and hide those little wood beams. But ultimately, as we continue this little clip, we'll see that I decided against it. It just didn't look quite right with having the pieces stick through that far, and it wasn't doing a good job of hiding the wood unless I pulled it out even further, and it just didn't look right. So we're gonna grab all three, raise them up a bit, then go ahead and duplicate it. And then adjust these middle pieces just a little bit so they meet up. Duplicate again and take it to the back of the walkway. And now let's get to building. Get all these pieces duplicated and copied across. All right, let's go ahead and get our tortoises back in the habitat. Had to double check what the exclamation point was. And then let's go look at what they need for foliage. So they need African and tropical. Go ahead and get started with a little water area for them. Just going to raise up some of this land. Doesn't have to look quite right, but I want to create a barrier for the water. I'm going to smooth it out a little. And then using the push tool, push some of the land down and then flatten to foundation. Smooth the edges up and add our water. And there we go, a nice little pool. Now let's take a look at our tortoise and what they need. So we're going to get their enrichment in. We are playing in sandbox, of course, but we're going to go ahead and give them everything that they need. Make sure that our habitat is the best that we can have. Get their food trough in. You can see the medium one was a little big. I didn't think they'd be able to walk by it to get to the other side of the tower. And here's the problem with having your roof in. Camera likes to spin you above it. And we'll toss some bedding into one side. Should be plenty of bedding. And I think they'll still be able to get over to the other side. We may throw in some more bedding over there. For enrichment, we have the ice block. And the fruit spike tree. Putting them over by the edge of the habitat so they'll go over there for the guests to see. And then they needed some toys, so we're going to put in a sprinkler, which we are going to move later in the episode, but we'll get it in for now. You can see I have a tiny bit of clipping with the water, but that's okay. Water's fussy enough. I'm going to deal with the tiny bit of clipping. And we'll give them a rubber ducky here in the pond with them. Now we'll get to working on our terrain. Just trying to create some grass, some sand, a little bit of rock, and get our terrain adjusted to what they need, while still keeping some of that sandy beach, sandcastle vibe. You can see just picking different things, adjusting the intensity, tapping very much like we did in our last episode to try and move the sandcastle, or the sand in our castle, and just trying to create a reasonably blended look. We're going to move on to foliage. I am going to go ahead and leave this in, but it is going to be sped up, or this video would be even longer. So starting with our tropical rocks, just building up some rock area around the water, using different sizes, different shapes, sinking them into the ground. Random rotation can be helpful here, and checking that option so you don't have all your rocks looking the same way. Not quite sure what I was pondering there for a minute, but went ahead and grabbed some more rocks. Just love putting rocks everywhere. Really helps break up the habitat, I think. I would like if we had some more kind of medium small sizes, as sometimes they can be so big. But we're going to grab the cladding pieces and kind of sink them into the ground here to create some rocky areas in our ground. Same thing here, just some more rocks, different sizes, different shapes, trying to create some texture in that ground. Decided not to use the willow tree, decided it was just way too big. Went back to rock placing, and again, just creating some different areas with some rock, little pieces sticking out. I like this particular piece because it has that pointy top, and it creates a decent looking, rock outcropping out of the ground. Now with African tropical, we actually don't have that many options for foliage. It's pretty narrow compared to a lot of the other biomes and continents. So we have a lot of green. Put down a tree, thought about putting this branch in, but decided ultimately that the mossy branch and mossy tree wasn't really going to fit with the rest of the area. There wouldn't really be a lot of moss in all of this very sunny sand. And just continue to go through what we had. We're going to sink this down in and then grab a second one and sort of stack them to create a very large fern bush effect. I decided not to use any of the Liara vines. I think it's Liara or the straggler fig roots because, again, this is supposed to be a sandcastle, and I didn't want to quite go for quite that jungly. So grab the, I believe, scavella or scaviola bushes and tried to stack some things in them. It didn't look quite right, so away those go. Again, just sinking these down that little bit so they look more like, I guess, more bushy and less like a tree. I thought that was a good effect. Looked at the rhubarb, giant rhubarb, but it was just too big for the habitat. Tried to incorporate the bird's nest fern. It didn't look right. Got some century plants. Went ahead and tossed some lilies into our little pond. And this kind of short and a little bit fatter palm. Put some around the front of our castle, which I did decide to move a little bit later so that you could still see the front of the castle and we're not blocking it entirely with palm trees. Went ahead and got rid of the mangrove apple. Went in and disabled the climbing. And then we are gonna, again, just sink this down and it'll create kind of a bush. And decided it was too big to go there, so rotated around, double checked that I had the smallest one, and pulled it over here with our palm tree to just edge up our pond and create this nice kind of bush effect, which I think turned out really well. Now, I do know, of course, that I could have added whatever I want to this and the animals would be fine, but I do like to try and keep with the theme, and I think it helps me use different pieces and get creative with how to use some of the more sparse biomes. Threw in some century plants again, some more ferns. I think I ended up pulling those out because I just didn't like them very much, at least not over there. Grabbed some of the elephant's ears and built up a little bit more over here by our rock. Using the bush again. Just to try and make it look a little fuller, like things are growing up out of them. And because there's so little color, we're actually going to grab this tamarind tree and sink it way into the ground to use the orange flowers to liven up a bit and add some color. Just trying to balance having enough of the flowers above the ground without having all this floating foliage that would make no sense. And you can see it's not traversable, but we still have plenty of room and we can put some more plants in for the tortoise. Grabbing these bushes again, I'm just going to start hiding them underneath the tamarind tree, which I think creates a really nice effect. You have the bushes and then the tree leaves look very bushy, and then you get the flowers, which at least helps break up a lot of this green and various colors of green and that bit of yellow. Toss a few more rocks in here. And just to break it up, look like maybe the flowers are growing on the other side. A few more of our little pointy tips. And a cladding, again, just to try and break it up and look like the flowers are growing up over the top of it, which I thought looked nice. And as you can see, I did decide to go ahead and get rid of the plants over there and duplicate our tree fern or our stacked tree fern. And sink that down, adding this kind of shrubby ferny bush over here on the other side. Thought about putting a second one in, but when I looked at it from the top, they actually take up a fair amount of space, and I decided against putting another one in. And that's about all our foliage, and we have some happy tortoises. So now we're going to go ahead and jump ahead a little bit, and we are going to put in a little bit of a waterfall, spring, something coming up out of our rocks here, just to add some vibrancy to our water. Also, in case you haven't noticed, I just really like waterfalls. So just using the waterfall bottom, sinking it down and getting it here at the edge of our pool, and then turning this particular waterfall piece sideways, work to create this little splash instead of a very large one. And then sunk it a little bit into the rock, moved it around until I was happy with how it was falling. You can see when I turn it straight, you get a much wider, so leaving it sideways seemed to work best for this very small area. And continued just to mess around till I was happy with where that water was falling. And that gets us a nice little water feature going for our tortoises. And here is our finished sandcastle, complete with some flags and bunting, as well as the coastal pig face. I put some of that around various parts of the castle just to add a little texture up the walls. So we have one-way glass right here to look into where they sleep and eat, give our guests a good view, and then of course they can come down the walkway. We have some nice glass, and then we have more one-way glass to look into the habitat. Takes us around back to our staff gates, which will be probably our water treatment and our staff facility here. You probably saw them, but I did pull them out for now. Come around and you can see that we have our water feature and our tortoises hanging out. You can see our bushes turned out really nice. We have some nice pop of color from the tamarind tree with the orange and the coastal pig face, just breaking up that sand and brick, giving some nice pink color. So there it is, our sandcastle. If you've made it this far, I'd like to thank you for joining me today in Planet Zoo. And as always, I wish you a pleasant day, and we'll see you soon.